Welcome to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. We want to encourage, equip, and connect those with a passion to impact the next generation for Jesus Christ. Student ministry can be a lonely place. You might even feel like you're the only one in your church or community that cares about students. Well, know this, you're not alone. People all across the country are engaging Gen Z and care deeply about the spiritual direction of these young men and women. Whether you're full-time, part-time, bivocational, or volunteer, if you have a heart for students, this is the place for you.
Oh, don't even know how to start. I don't know that. So,
welcome to Student Ministry Matters.
Yeah, something like that. All right.
Welcome to the show.
All right, here we go. Welcome to another edition of Student Ministry Matters. My name is Dan Carson, and I'm one of the hosts of this crazy thing we're doing. With me, I have Micah Powell.
Heyo.
And Chris Fines.
Heyo.
Nice. Well, we want to thank you for joining us as we continue the conversation about student ministry. On today's podcast, we're going to talk about a subject that I get asked about a lot. How do I grow my youth group? Honestly, it's a tough subject, but one that definitely deserves our attention. But before we get to that, I want to talk for a minute about how you can support this ministry. Our goal is to support all types of student ministry workers in the Lord's church. You may be full-time, part-time, bivocational, or volunteer, but that rarely changes your desire to impact those students with the life-changing gospel of Jesus Christ. So to fulfill our mission, we could use your help. And of course, we want you to be praying for us, but we could also use your help financially. We have a Patreon program that's available at patreon.podbean.com/Student Ministry Matters, and you can find that in our show notes, but you also have the ability to give through your local church and then have them send a donation our way, and we'll have that address in our show notes as well. You know, your donations will help us continue this podcast as well as provide resources for student ministry workers. If you have any questions, you can contact us at info@studentministrymatters.com. Now, the other way to support us is to simply share this podcast with your friends and others in student ministry. You know, the old like and subscribe. That helps all of us here. Well, enough of that. Let's get to this week's random question of the week. And I haven't asked the guys before or told them what was coming, so they may have to take a moment, so I'll start us off. But what was your dream job before God said, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men? We all had dreams. Now, you may have been a little guy. You may have been thinking about ministry for many years. But for me, I dreamed from the 9th grade until God called me into ministry halfway through my senior year. I dreamed of being a photojournalist. I wanted to take pictures for National Geographic and go to jungles and far off places. But, you know, the simple truth is I hate bugs, so I don't know how I was going to handle the jungles. But I love taking pictures. In fact, I still take pictures at weddings of families, you know, a wide range of things. And so it is just one of those things. Photojournalism was my key. It was the thing I loved in high school. And I was a musician, but if I wasn't in the band room, I was over in my dark room working on stuff, because back then, film, negatives, prints, that whole thing. And so way back in the dark ages. Chris, how about you? What was your dream job before God called you into ministry?
I wanted to be an NBA star. Yeah. Every day I would go home and I'd watch this old feature family film called Pistol Pete.
Nice.
The Pistol. And I would dream of being as good as Pistol Pete Maravich. And then I'd go outside and I'd play, and then I'd realize that there was no hope.
So was you like your, pseudonym name, was it Pea Shooter Chris? Is that like?
No. Oh. Nope. Never got that far. Just Chris.
Just Chris.
And, yeah. So that was my dream. Either that or I wanted to be a sailor.
So it wasn't, so then the name was probably Miss Chris. Is that probably what it was in basketball? Miss Chris. Or no. Oh, is that offensive?
Well, I don't know. I was confused. A lot of people yelled Brick House. So
it's a great song.
Yeah, so I thought that was a cool nickname. They called me Brick.
How about you, Micah? Did you have a dream job?
I'm trying not to say all the jokes.
I know.
That was just
I know.
one after another. I mean, it's like skipping a rock on a pond for me. It's just like wide open spaces. You just being out there on the sea and just skipping a rock. I could just do it forever. Man, that one's tough. So when I was like 8 years old, my mom was like, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I was like, "A missionary." And my mom and dad were like, "Yeah, we probably need to get you in some classes." That's like, other kids are like, I want to be a marine biologist or I want to be a firefighter. And I'm like, I want to be a missionary. Anyways, when I like teenage years, I wanted to be in like a band, and travel with music and sing. And at the time it was like not heavy metal, but like alternative rock. So like Goo Goo Dolls or Counting Crows or Sister Hazel, that kind of stuff, horrible music. I love that music. So I was like always enjoying always looking for a full band to play with and stuff. And so that was just to sing on stage and like just rock it out. That was probably my main dream.
I think that if you step around, seminary where you're at, or back when we were in Bible college, you'd find guys wanting to do all sorts of things. And it's always, well, God called me out of that, or God called me to this. How old were you guys when God called you into ministry? Chris, how old were you?
I was 15.
15. Micah?
I was 16.
You were 16. Wow. I was like an old man at 19. And so, but God changes our dreams, and his desires became my desires. And, and I still get to play around and be photographer. But it's different. I don't find any long-term love in that. I find it in what God has me doing right now. And so, well, tonight's question it's a big one. It's one that, like I said, I get asked a lot in my role as the director for the BMA of Arkansas Youth Department, as people come and say, "Hey, how do I grow my youth ministry?" Now, it's not the question of how do I start one. That's a conversation for another night, which we will probably address. But how do we grow the one we're at? Now, I have been in all sorts of different venues, small churches, medium-sized churches. Now, I haven't been in the large churches, at least where I was the main guy. And so, I've struggled with this, but I think about my current setting. I went in, I brought my two teenagers at that point. We more than doubled our size because they had one youth group age person, and then all of a sudden it became 3. And so that was the start, and it's been really slow growth where I'm at. And COVID has not helped at all. And so I know that a lot of us and a lot of you listening are probably dealing with that same thing, that COVID is kind of kicking our tail with numbers. But there's some principles, there's some things that we can put in place and be thinking about as we go forward, where we can actually grow in number, because those numbers represent people. That's the one thing I want us to focus in on, is that it's not just big for big's sake. It's not just so we can brag and say we have the best youth group around, but it is because every single one of those people represent a soul, they represent a person. And so I just want to encourage you guys, as we go forward in this conversation tonight, think about that if you are reaching one student, that's one student that you're making an impact on. If you have 3, 10, 20, God calls us to go out and make disciples and to see growth. And so that's why we're focusing in on numbers tonight. I want us to start with some of the things that Chris is bringing to the table. He's got 3 things that we're going to share and talk about, and then we'll move on to Micah, and then I'll have a few things to wrap up. But Chris, why don't you share some of the things that we were talking about?
Okay. Well, first off, everyone out there in podcast land needs to know that I am not speaking from an expert or as an expert on this subject. But these are some thoughts that I've had just on this particular subject. I think it's important first, when we just think about numerical growth, to first just understand your context. And I probably need to explain that a little bit. We all have, I say we all, but I would assume that most of us, I know us here in this podcast now, we've come to churches that are already pre-existing, right? We haven't gone and started our own church and planted our own church and started a youth group from the ground up. We've walked into something that was already existing. My church that I'm at is almost 105 years old. The youth ministry hasn't always been there for 105 years, but they've had a youth ministry for a long time, and it's seen a lot of ups and downs. I know I have parents of kids in my youth group right now who were in the youth group back in the late 80s, early 90s, maybe late 90s would be a better place. But it was, they were running anywhere from 80 to 100 kids, every Wednesday night. And they had a certain model of youth ministry that was rocking and rolling then. And it's not that way today. And it's gone through several different youth pastors and different things like that. But also, just when I say know your context, understand where you are in your community. And I think that allows you to have right expectations. Not to say that we shouldn't expect to grow, but to understand that students, very practically speaking, and you guys correct me if your experience has been different on this, kids are going to go where their parents go, or where those who are in charge of them go to church, or don't go to church, right? Some of us are living in a community where our church may be the quote unquote go-to church in that community. And as a result, youth group tends to be a little bit larger because maybe your church is that go-to church. It's more established. That's your context. Maybe you're in a place, in a community where you're one of 10 churches, and families and kids are just all spread out amongst all those churches. I don't know, but I think it's important just to recognize and know your context. And that allows you to, I believe, be very strategic in how you go about reaching your community. Because what we don't want is just to be trading kids from youth group to youth group. We certainly don't want to be stealing kids from another youth group. But I will add this, that if a church is not teaching scripture, if they're not holding to healthy, sound doctrine, then I have no problem stealing a kid from that youth group. But that's my opinion there. All right. And then the other thing is, go ahead. Yeah.
Dan. Before you go on, the one thing I want to point out is I think about my own context. I'm at Calvary Baptist Church in Fayetteville. It's a big community. There's a lot of people there. Well, 2 miles from our church is Cross Church, Fayetteville. It's enormous. There's no way I can compete with some of the activities and some of the things that happen there. And so I have to know from my context that I have to be different. And so I have to know that it's going to look different. One of my students said the other day that, and she's the type of girl that I fully expected to latch onto a church like that, or First Baptist Church Farmington. But what she said was that, no, I'm being taught the Bible here. And so that's so important, but starting with knowing your context. So I just wanted to add that in.
Again, I think it comes down to that. Knowing your context allows you to have better expectations moving forward. Again, it's hard to talk about that because churches are in all different sorts of contexts. Right. So when we talk about numerical growth, we have to take that into account, I believe. I don't, this next one, I'm going to say a word that we all do, but I think in the culture of youth ministry that we are particularly in, a lot of times the word event can come across as a dirty word for some reason. I think it's because we don't want to be labeled as quote unquote event driven, right. Where we're no longer youth pastors or youth workers, but we are just event coordinators. So I think we don't want to talk in those lines, but I do believe that it's important for us to plan and host events. But I believe we need to do so with a purpose. So the second one is, when talking about numerical growth, strategically plan and host events with a particular purpose in mind. So I'll give you, for instance, for us, it doesn't always work out this way, especially in years where there's COVID-19. But I try to plan an event, an outreach event once per quarter. That might be a Nerf night where we just, my kids who love to shoot Nerf guns at each other and all that kind of stuff, they want to invite friends, and we just have this big Nerf war. And it's strategic because we're trying to go after kids who aren't already plugged into a youth group and helping them come and just be a part of our community for one night, and then to hopefully help them get transitioned into what we do on a normal basis, and so that's the purpose behind it, with also the express purpose of, it just feels good to pop a kid with a Nerf dart every now and then.
Amen.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's in the Bible.
It is. So yeah, I think it's good to host events, strategic events with a purpose, I don't know. And let me stop here and stop saying so many words, but what do you guys think about that? Has that been your experience? I mean, do you agree with that, or has there been, I don't know, what do you think about that?
I think that, it should challenge you. Like, events, you should do something that can help bring people together. And so if we stay away from the word event, just, doing something that helps the kids find a safe space, a comfortable space for each personality to find that community, find the way that they plug into the cog in the wheel, and just kind of figure a way for them to make them feel at home, welcomed. And even like visitors, your upcoming 7th graders, something I was kind of thinking of when you were talking about doing events. We had once upon a time, like not a graduation service, but just when they came in, it was like this unspoken thing where they just kind of joined the group. And so I felt like it was really helpful to have something that helped implement people to like our normal Wednesday night function. So if they say that they went from one week to the next, and we had some new 7th graders come up, and we would do like a mingle before we'd begin our worship. So I'd take like 1 or 2 songs out of our service, and just kind of let them provide a little bit of food or something, and just kind of let them, I would get like a Nerf ball and, get in the middle of the students, just kind of throw the ball to a senior and kind of say, hey, tell us your name, something we don't know about you. And just kind of do that for 5 or 10 minutes. And then kind of get them, and then like on purpose, have them throw it to one of the 7th graders, and just kind of get people talking. And then also we had I think I led first month in August, and then in September, that first month there, and from school beginning, about 4 weeks after that, I led like an orientation class for those 7th graders. That was like, here's kind of how we function. Like, you're in our small group on Wednesday night, and I'm going to be teaching it. Just kind of want to show you guys how it'll work, what it'll look like. We do separate, genders, and we do separate kind of this around this age group, and so want you guys to know what to kind of go into. So when you go into these classes, that you're going in functioning as a student still, reading the Bible, doing some personal Bible study from the previous week, and bringing your struggles to your small group leader, and then if you need full response and some help counseling, and just kind of an implementation where we're able to implement them well in the service. Another thing I think it was helpful was, outside of just the general events, was like community driven focus. Like, and I don't want to make it seem, and I'm not an expert, but this was really helpful. I've read John MacArthur, and I've said it before. If I worry about the depth in my Bible study of knowing Christ and in my preaching, then I would let Christ worry about the breadth, worry about the numbers. And so in Scripture, what I found was, people were just around each other. Like, the people in Acts were just often hanging out in the community, taking the gospel to people. And so taking your community, your student ministry out in the community for like I hate this term, but like a backyard barbecue or a park or something that's like out in the community where people can see you, where there's other students, or there's other 7th graders, or there's other kids or other families. And for them to see the name of the church, or even just like, if they ask questions like, hey, come play basketball with us, like, oh, well, who are you with? And just, I don't know, those are great evangelistic ways to help grow our student ministry. And it may not have been hundreds of people, but by far the number one growing tool that I've seen in my ministry was just faithful preaching, trying to preach as best I could, giving them something from the Bible, from God, give them good interpretation of what that text says and how that informs their life. And then how to study the Bible from that to Wednesday to the next. And then I tell you, like, I don't know, it wasn't personality as much as it is just opening God's word and loving God's word that the students they took to it. So those are just kind of some things that I feel like that were really helpful in my ministry to grow student ministries. And I'm no expert at all either, but those are just all really helpful things for me.
Micah, there were several suggestions that I heard in there that I think are valuable. Getting out in the community, taking your your group out for a study at the park, just being out, being seen and being visible. That this whole idea of that Chris was sharing about hosting events with a purpose, I think that just brings about this idea of being intentional with everything that we do, especially when it comes to, we're going to have a lock-in. Well, why are we having a lock-in? Or why are we having a Nerf night or Jungle Pong night? Those crazy events are great entry points for students to come and see, hey, these adults aren't just sourpusses all the time. They care about us. They can have a good time. They can be involved with students, be relational. So a lot of neat things there. Chris, I think you had one more thing you were going to share.
I did. I actually have two, but the other one's really
Okay.
quick. No, I believe it's important that we focus on families, and that we connect with families. I totally get, and this goes back to, I believe, the first one I mentioned, the context. We're always going to be coming in contact and having relationships with kids who come from all different sorts of backgrounds. Some are going to have very stable, traditional family structures where the mom and the dad are doing an excellent job of discipling within the home. And but then there's going to always be others who are on the other side of the spectrum that don't have mom and dad in the home, that maybe even don't even know mom or dad, or so there's variations to that. And so you need to take a more primary role in that discipling process. And I know I'm dipping into the spiritual growth there, but I believe it's just important that as we focus on families, and as we focus on equipping families to disciple their kids, that other families in the community, if we do that well and we do that faithfully and we do that consistently, that I believe that's a long-term numerical growth strategy. I think a lot of times when we think about numerical growth, we think of it in the short term and not so much in the long term. But I believe that if we focus on families and we focus on really equipping families to do that well, and we build our ministry with that in mind, of this equipping style ministry, that's going to be healthier, not just for your youth group, but for your church in the long run. And I believe other families in the community, again, if you do it faithfully and do it well, I think they'll take notice of that and notice that that's a place that they want to be a part of. And so again, there's more that could be said on that, but I think my point is across. I hope it is, at least. But then the other thing, this last one is easy and quick, is if you want to grow your youth group like numerically quickly, then have a van ministry. Go pick kids up. I mean, honestly,
that's the worst advice you've ever given. Don't do this. No,
I didn't.
Kidding.
I didn't say you drive it, but hey, but listen, sometimes you don't have a choice. Hey, I've been in my church now. I've been in my church now for 7 years, and I was blessed for the first 3.5 of those years to have a guy who would drive the van every single week, and he would bring kids. He was always bringing kids, and he was also leading another ministry in our church, and I was super thankful for him. And I tried to express that in many ways, and did. And anyway, he and his family moved, and I tried to fill that role. I tried to find somebody to fill that role, and just no one would ever stick with it. And on a Wednesday afternoon, I tried myself to keep driving the van as much as I could, and it worked for a little while until really I just couldn't do it anymore. I just didn't have. I would have kids show up and be unsupervised, and it was just different. It was just a difficult context, and so it's one of those things that personally, I would like to see happen again in our ministry. I don't know if 2020 is the time to start back a van ministry right now, but there's not much social distancing going on there.
No,
if that's your cup of tea. But I really do. I think there's benefit there in considering picking kids up, but also, again, that's a whole nother subject that I don't want to delve into right now, because you can do that well, but you can also do that really poorly. So I say that with an asterisk by it, that Abandoned ministry can be really helpful for numerical growth, but it can also be a dangerous thing if you don't do it well.
Yeah, I kind of have mixed feelings about that, and so I think it'd be a great conversation sometime, because we have apartment complexes all around our church. The neighborhood has changed over the years. Some of the lowest income housing in Fayetteville is around our church. That means the fields are white unto harvest. That whole concept, but being the guy to be able to go get them yourself. And, if you have somebody who has that passion, I'm kind of jealous of the guy you had for those years. Cause it's somebody who has a desire to serve, a desire to reach kids and reach students. That can be a great thing. But when it's put on you as the youth pastor or the lead student ministry worker at your church, that can just be so heavy at times. Let me add a few things that when I look at growing numerically, I think there's some principles that you can apply no matter what size your church is or otherwise. Is the first is this idea of doing things with excellence. Too often we just halfway do things in our churches and in our ministries because, it's just the students, or it's just the students that show up anyway because their parents are bringing them to church and they're going to be here anyway. And so I just want to encourage you to approach everything with excellence, whether it's your message, whether it is your musical worship, if you're having that with your students, if it's an event, whatever you're working on, I want to encourage you to do those things with excellence. The second thing that I would say, if you're wanting to grow, is to be relational, or to put things in place that make it a possibility for students to have a great relationship with a good, godly adult. Now, that may mean that you have small group leaders that are taking care of that. It may mean that you alone, if you have 3 students in your student ministry, well, it may be you. However, and we've talked about this before, is I would encourage you always to have a member of the opposite sex there with you. And so you're never in a room alone with 3 girls if you're the guy youth pastor. That's just a bad story. So you need to have that assistant with you in it. But be relational. Connect with these students. I think about some of the students that I have. I'll get text, I'll get messages through Instagram, and there's lines. We have to be careful. I understand that. But when we're wanting to grow our student ministry, they need to find a place where they feel safe, they feel secure, where they feel loved. And that's what we want to provide in that. My third thing is very similar to Chris's third thing. He was talking about connecting with parents. I want to say communicate with the parents, whether it is parents that are inside of your church that are established and they are always going to be there and always bring their kids, or with it is little Johnny who is just showed up at church one Wednesday night and he's there by himself. You need to figure out how you're going to communicate with his parents to make sure that they're informed, because it can make a big difference on his involvement. Will he ever go to church camp or not? Whether he'll go to a conference with the group, or if you'll ever have the opportunity to see him there on a Sunday. It all comes down to how much you're going to communicate with them. And sometimes that can be difficult. Sometimes the parents don't want anything at all to do with church, but you still need to step into that and lean into that. So those are just a couple of things that I had. Micah, do you have any other suggestions, things that we would want to do as we're looking at trying to grow the numbers in our youth group?
Yeah, don't do it. It's more of a headache. Just pull the ejection thing and just get out of Dodge.
Just have one or 2 students, right? That's
6 is too many.
6 is too many.
I have 2 students in my household, and it's already too difficult. One is 2 years old, and the other's 30, almost 32 as of tomorrow. Bless their heart. So, no, I'm just kidding. No, I think everything we've said has been really good. Kind of to Chris's mentioning earlier, he talks about families. I kind of did the opposite, where I would meet students that were like out in the community and would just like talk to them, get to know them because of acquaintances or friends or students that I had eating lunch with. And then I would see them in the student ministry. And then as we kind of implemented some of those kids, then their families came. Then I'd see their families at the ball games, and then their families would come to the church because we had a good student ministry, a growing student ministry, and a missional student ministry, like going on mission trips. I mean, that brought a lot of students. Because I don't know what it was about this upcoming generation that's so awesome, but the biggest thing is their mission. They like even people that were Methodist were coming to Park Place at the time, and were joining the student ministry. It was awesome. It was so cool. Like we had of course some people that were considered atheists, young men and women. As they started to come, we saw salvations, and then their parents would show up. I went on a mission trip one time to Potosi, Missouri. It's a mission trip for American mission trip. And it just helped a pastor there named Brian Kingston, who I love dearly. He's a good dude. And he's a pastor there, and he'd been there maybe a year, not a long time. And he just needed some help doing some community outreach. And so I kind of coordinated with him. And we went up there and spent the night in the church. Guys spent the night in church, and the girls spent the night in a house. And that actually brought us like 4 or 5 students that had never even been to our church. So if you kind of winced just then, or if you kind of were like, I don't know about that. It took some trust for sure. We had to do some regulations to protect everybody, but all 4 of those 5 or 6 students kept coming and stayed with us. And so like, I kind of actually did the opposite. Started with students relationships. And then as their parents showed up, I'd have like to kind of draw their parents in, and not just in the church service, which we always wanted to do with like handouts, communication, announcements, stuff like that. We would have like a family night so that they could come at the beginning of the year, and we'd have like food, and then we'd have the parents mingle so they could see like what the student ministry expected, and some regulations and some stuff for parents to kind of have that was like protective documents or forms, or just kind of the itinerary for the year, that kind of stuff. And really the biggest part of it was to get them to meet them and to talk with them and to show them that we were trustworthy and that we cared about their kid and them, just like teachers. And really a lot of those conversations led us to see some of those couples join the church. And that was all convictional. That wasn't my idea as much as it was like our job is to go and to make disciples of all nations and to reach everybody that's around us. And so if parents came in, or if you were in my proximity and you were a non-believer, and you were in proximity also with one of our believer students or believer parents, I was going to go just try to talk to you. And I didn't really have a program or anything, just wanted to be among people that were lost. And I think God really used that. And I think I had a last thought earlier. Comes to numbers. I feel like to talk about numbers, we also need to protect about only thinking about numbers. Like that needs to be a huge conversation. Right. But to just make it simple, if all you're doing is trying to draw students in for numbers' sake, then you will lose them to what you gained them with. So like, if you buy a bunch of pizza and soda and you cheap preach, you're going to lose them to the same thing. It's a moth to the flame. I mean, but if you're trying to draw and to grow a student ministry with solidity and a kind of a steadfast, consistent growth, dense preaching, put that absolutely first, put God first, pray diligently, seek the Lord on your knees and on your face in your bedroom, with your family. And if you buy pizza, awesome. But if you do that all the time, just for numbers' sake, I do think that you'll lose them to a church that has more money and more programs and more events. And so we also need to protect from that too. That's kind of my final thought.
Yeah, there's a statement that my pastors made, and I think we may have talked about it here, is what you win them with is what you have to keep them with. And it was just kind of the reverse of what you said. Somebody else is going to pull them away. If they were drawn to pizza and a game night, somebody else with a pizza and game night may pull them. But if they find security in God's word and find that relationship and some of those things that are a little bit deeper and more meaningful, then they'll keep coming back. I want to ask a question before we wrap up. One of the things that you talked about was the having students go on a mission trip, which we find that Generation Z is very missional in their thinking. They want to impact the world. They want to do things for the cause of Christ and just to be positive in the world in general. I look at this 2020. Holy cow! We've taken our youth groups. I don't know what your youth group looks like now, But I do know that youth groups as a whole are suffering just like churches are suffering, trying to figure out what to do next, how it's going to work. We're down in numbers. We're down in families coming back to church. It hurts and it's painful as someone who cares for those people. But we've got to keep going, and we just got to keep doing it and keep reaching people and keep loving on people because it's just so important. Chris, you got any final words before we wrap up?
Well, I think we've overlooked one key component to this whole numerical growth. We need people in our churches to have babies.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, future students, absolutely.
I mean, there is a reality that you build your children's ministry, and that will build your student ministry.
Yeah, I know, man. I mean, look, I'm in a church right now. I mean, my faith family. We've got families in there that have. We're about to have 2 families that have 6 kids. We had one family that had 5 kids, and they moved, and I was mad at them. Still am. We need families to have kids, and we need families to have more than one. Lord willing, that kind of thing. That only helps numerical growth.
I mean, I sent 10 years ago, I sent 5 emails to the Duggars to come join a church, but it just never happened. I mean, I wouldn't have needed a student ministry. I'd just been like, yep, got the Duggars. They're here. No more allowed. We can't allow any more to sit in our student ministry. So, yeah, sorry. Got to turn you away. Too much growth. But it didn't happen.
Well.
So, one in God's providence.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm with you guys. I mean, on a serious note, I mean that was kind of serious, but I said it sarcastically. I'll be honest. I've never personally been wrapped up into trying to get just a huge crowd there. There's people out there that are listening to this right now who are in youth groups where they know how to draw a crowd, and they do a great job at it. And I applaud you guys. Y'all are doing an awesome job. But I also know that there's people out there right now listening that are volunteer youth workers who are getting off work at 5:00 and getting to their church building as quickly as they can, just in hopes that somebody's going to show up,
Yeah.
and and so some of the things that we've talked about just don't apply in that context. That's the kind of church that I grew up in. At the end of the day, what we've talked about in previous podcasts when it comes to discipleship and reaching families and things like that, and things that we've already implied in this podcast, that's what we need to put all of our efforts on, I believe. Again, I agree everything with you that you said, Dan. I mean, we want to reach people. We want to get more people in there, because those aren't just objects and seats. They are souls, who have that will spend eternity somewhere. And so I think that's important for us to realize. But at the end of the day, we are, as pastors, we are called to shepherd the flock that the Lord has given us. 1 Corinthians, I believe it's chapter 4. Paul, he reminds us that we don't need to boast about anything that we have received. Now, he's speaking in a different context there, but I think it can be applied in this context as well. We're in youth groups that we don't own, but that we have received from the Lord. He's the one who's brought them there, and we need to be faithful with the ones that He's given us. And we need to talk often about reaching out to our communities with the gospel in hopes that the Lord would bring more into our midst. And so I agree that this is important, but it's not something that I sit up worrying about.
Yeah. And don't hear in this too, guys, the do better mentality, like a lot, because I feel like a lot of us listen to these things and we go, man, that was a good, it's kind of like gleaning, a crop that has just been cut. Like, not all of it's been gathered, some of it's left behind, and it's all good things that you can glean. But don't hear in this like do better, because God doesn't want us to just. It's not all about works. It is for sure. Faith produces works, obviously, but there's so much legalism that can be caught up in that idea of I need to do better. I need to do. It's like more. It's more like you need to be his. You need to be God's. You need to be found in him. And he's going to worry. He's going to let him worry about the numbers. Like, as long as you're being diligent in your walk with him, and you're trying to follow his statutes and lean on God for all things. It's less about do better, Christian, and more about leaning on God for in our weakness, because we're not strong. Dan's not strong. Chris is not strong. I'm not strong. I don't want you guys to hear that you have to like be us. You don't have to do all these 5 things and you'll have a healthy church. Like, that's almost like name it and claim it, health and wealth, prosperity stuff. We just want you to be found in Christ. And we're just brainstorming ideas of things that we can do. They're not gospel, but just to try to find a heart, follow the Lord as his child, and lean on him, and he'll direct your path. He'll protect you and guide you where he wants you to be.
Well, guys, I think it's time for us to wrap up tonight. I just want to say and echo what these 2 men have shared. We're not experts. We are on the same journey that you are, trying to work with and influence students with the gospel. We care about you. We care about our students, and we just want to do that work. Why? Because student ministry matters.
Thanks for listening to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. Get connected at studentministrymatters.com or follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Student Ministry Matters. Until next time, keep up the great work with your students, because the work matters.